Hello and welcome to another one of D's ADD videos. Today we're going to be looking at some basic examples of factoring, and I'm going to illustrate the concept of factoring by grouping. So here we have some basic problems to work out, and if you remember, we take A times C. Let's recap the steps real quick. We take A times C and get this number, and we break down that number into its factors, and you find the right combination of factors that add or subtract to give you that number B. So they multiply to give you A times C, right? But they add to give you B. And then you break that middle B term down into those two numbers with the X attached, group the first two and the last two together as separate pairs, factor out what's common to the first two and then what's common to the last two. And then you should get what's left in the parentheses to be the exact same thing. If you didn't, either you can't factor or you did something wrong, so check your work. Then pull out the common parentheses and you're left with what's in front of the parentheses in its own group. Alright, so let's see that in action. So most of you that have been factoring long enough can see that this should be x minus 7 times x plus 4, right? And you really don't need to do by grouping, but just to make it easy to see, I'm going to use this basic example because they do get more complex in these problems right here. And usually on the test you don't see these basic ones. So we got a negative 28. What are the factors of negative 28 that add up to a negative 3? Well, we got 2 times 14, and one of these has to be negative, but either way, if that's negative or that's negative, those don't add or subtract to negative 3. So then we go 7 times 4. There you go. That works. So 7 times 4 gives you the 7 having to be negative in order to get the negative 3x. Then you break that middle term up into those two things. Don't forget the x again, or your signs for that matter. And then now we're going to group the first two together and the last two together. So factor out the x that's common to both of these. And to figure out what's left behind, if you watch the factoring out the greatest common factor, you take what you had originally of what you're factoring out. So x squared over x gives me x. Then negative 7x over x. I guess I'll do the first one over the side just so you can see what's going on. It cancels down to x, and then negative 7x over x gives me a negative 7. So that's what goes inside the parentheses. And when I do the second set of grouping, I better get that x minus 7 again. Alright, so here if I factor out what's common to these two right here, what's common? Well, there's a 4 common to both of those. And sure enough, when I divide 4x by 4, I get x, and then negative 28 by 4, I get minus 7. And this is what I was talking about, the rectangle in the parentheses. This better be the same thing as that. Okay, and if so, you can factor it out in front, and you'll be left with that expression in front of your parentheses. So you'll be left with this and this in its own parentheses. Oops, sorry about that. So if we were to write that problem in, we get that there. Alright? And again, if you've done this long enough, you should have been able to just look at it immediately and get that answer, right? Or not immediately, but within a few seconds or minutes. So let's look at this next one. Again, you should see it's x minus 5, x plus 4, right? And you might ask, why am I doing it the long way? Well, some of the more advanced examples of factoring can get a little tricky. So here we have factors of negative 20, because again, a is 1, because there's nothing there, are going to be 2 and 10. That doesn't work. 4 and 5 works. So we come over here to it's a 5, I promise you. 5 must be negative. So we have x squared minus 5x plus 4x. Notice that negative 5x plus 4x still adds up to the negative x. So we didn't change the problem, we just rewrote it in a different way. Now there's 4 terms instead of 3 terms, and we can have 2 sets of pairs. So if we factor out the x that's common there, I'm going to be left with x minus 5. And then here, if I factor out a 4, I'm going to be left with x minus 5 again. And then when I factor out the x minus 5, I get x plus 4 that I had in front of the parentheses, right? Times that x minus 5 that's common. And that's it. That's all there is to factoring by grouping. So here is another set. Now the guesswork gets a little bit more complicated whenever we have stuff in front, like this 2. Well, it's not as bad if you do factoring by grouping, because you do 2 times 12 gives me or 2 times 6, sorry, gives me a 12. Factors of 12 that add up to a negative 7. So we've got 4 and 3. Looks like the likely candidates, right? Because there was 12 and 1 and 2 and 6. None of those add or subtract up to a negative 7. A quick little side note, if this is a plus sign, both things in the parentheses must be that, okay? Or both factors in this case have to be that, all right? Negative. Or if this was a plus sign, they both have to be positive. So in this case, if I rewrote it, I'd get 2x squared minus 4x. It doesn't matter which order you wrote them in. I'm just writing it like this because it's easier for me to deal with 2 and 4 commonalities and 3 and 6 commonalities than the other way around. So then if I factor out the 2x that's common, I'm left with an x minus 2. Factor out the negative 3, it's common, and I'm going to be left with an x minus 2. Had over factor is all I'm doing here, guys. So if you don't understand what I'm saying, look at the greatest common factor video again and do some example work. So factor out the x minus 2, you're left with 2x minus 3. You're done. No guesswork involved. Okay. Let's look at this one here. Oop, we need a sign. Let's see. 24. This would need to be a negative sign, I believe. So what are the factors of 24? Where did the 24 come from? This times this. So we have a negative 24, and 6 times 4 doesn't work, 8 times 3 won't work, 2 times 12 will work, and the 12 needs to be negative, because that adds up to a negative 10, right? And that's the magic number that we're looking for right there. So if we break it down, we get 3x squared minus 12x plus 2x minus 8. Factor out the 3x, and you're left with an x minus 4 plus 2. Factor out x minus 4 again. Factor out that x minus 4, and then you're left with the things in front of the parentheses. No guesswork. A lot quicker if you do it this way. I'll show you some more advanced examples in the next video, but for now I think that's enough for you to practice some of the basic problems. And practice is the key. So I hope I've cleared up any confusion that you might have. Thank you and have a nice day.